Hey everyone, it's Gia back again with Mull It Over for Hearthstone Grandmasters 2020 Season 2. To kick off the Scholomance Academy meta, I want to shine the spotlight on a deck that was brought by no less than 100% of European GMs for Week 1. Tempo Mage, also known as Small Spell Mage. As we're still very early in the meta, most players haven't agreed yet on what the best 30 cards are for the list, but I'll be using Psychos for reference because it runs a bunch of the flex cards. These one-of copies might not be run at all in some lists, or have up to 2 copies in others, and legendaries such as Jandisperov and Shinvala don't always appear. Other lists even run cards like Mirror Image, Wormweaver, and Violet Spellwing. But no matter what the tech cards, the defining factor for this archetype is Sorcerer's Apprentice and cheap spells, supported by card draw and spell damage. Because Apprentice is the enabler for what we call payoff cards, it's nearly always kept in the mulligan. Also good keeps are on-curve early plays such as Lab Partner, Astromancer Solarian, and Primordial Studies, which often gives a cheap spell damage minion. But keep in mind, because the deck usually wants to go for combos and big pop-off turns, you shouldn't evaluate most of the other cards in the mulligan on an individual basis. Instead, consider how each card synergizes with the rest of your hand. For example, let's take a look at this mirror between Jarla and Swids, where Jarla instantly full keeps these 4 cards. This makes perfect sense because with the coin, he's able to do a big Apprentice plus Cyclone combo turn as early as turn 3, likely for at least 4 spells. The coin, 2 halves of Ray of Frost, and the arcane missiles he'll get from his turn 1 Violet Spellwing. In the mirror, he's also very likely to have good targets to hit with a Ray of Frost, so it's just about an ideal opener. However, notice how both Mana Cyclone and Ray of Frost are much weaker if Apprentice had not been available to go with them. In fact, we can contrast this directly with what happened in Jarla's game versus Swid's Warrior. Jarla kept Cyclone on coin, and at first glance, it's very tempting to do that because Cyclone can generate so much value necessary to refill after Warriors removed your stuff. But this is not without its risks. Later on, Jarla draws Shinvala and the second Cyclone, both of which are payoff cards. But he finds neither card draw nor Apprentice, which leads to a very slow series of turns. He's eventually forced to play the first Cyclone for just 2 cards, and he eventually gasses out in the late game. To smooth out your combos and save up cards for the payoff turn, it's wise to keep card draw, mainly in the form of Cram Session. Because of Lab Partner and Primordial Studies, Cram Session is usually a cheaper Arcane Intellect, which is why Psycho and Frozen keep those cards together. And sometimes, it gets even better. Speaking of AI, though it's less efficient than Cram Session, it's still a decent keep versus slow matchups like Warrior, as Muzzy shows us here. When you have the time, you should prioritize card draw. But of course, versus say Aggro Rogue, you absolutely do not have the time, so Surrender tosses it here. The tough thing about playing Tempo Mage is identifying whether your role should be proactive or reactive. Because the deck is so flexible, it can fill either role, depending on your hand, on the matchup, or even whether or not you have the coin. When playing against Guardian Druid, for example, Mage should try to be proactive in the early game. Your first goal is to pressure them during the ramp turns, and so Frozen keeps Shinvala versus Muzzy's Druid, as it's unlikely to be removed when played on curve. When the Shinvala goes off the next turn, it also sets up 2 5 health minions, which survive against single trades from either Lake Thrasher or Teacher's Pet off of Guardian Animals. In contrast, Tice's situation versus Bunny Hopper's Secret Rogue is absolutely reactive. As early as turn 2, you can tell Tice's hand is built for a response turn, using the Cyclone and Sorcerer's Apprentice to swing and hopefully stick a Mana Giant soon after. So Tice essentially passed 2 turns until A, he had more mana to work with, and B, Bunny Hopper had played minions for him to target. And then Tice did the big pop-off to end with both board and value in hand. From that position, Tice leveraged the Mana Giants to close out the game. Finally, let's take a look at this match between Jarla and Boar Control. Jarla keeps an unconventional card, Shinvala, because he already has turns 1 and 2 curve guaranteed. On the other hand, Boar tosses everything except his turn 1 play of Violet Spellwing, because Mana Cyclone and Evocation are payoff cards and he didn't have Apprentice. Also, he didn't necessarily have a way to activate Wand Thief without using the ever-precious coin. Jarla later plays Shinvala on curve. While it's ambitious to hope it sticks, it's not so much that he's banking on generating a 5/5 the following turn, but more that he's presenting a must-kill target that requires quite a few resources for Boar to answer. And if Boar were to do his big Cyclone combo, Jarla was sitting on his own Apprentice and Cyclone to respond, which is exactly what went down. That one Shanvala set off a chain reaction of plays and counterplays that eventually culminated in Boar gassing out on turn 10 and Jarla claiming the victory. You know, I get the sinking feeling that I'm gonna have to redo parts of this video as the tempo mage lists get more refined or when people start to agree more on how to play certain matchups, but you know what, I'm okay with that because this early part of the meta when everything's so volatile is definitely the most fun. Anyway, check back next week as we look at some GM decks played in the Last Hero Standing format. See you next time.